Good morning, everyone. Rick, thanks again for that wonderful sharing. I have with us on stage the other speakers, and I just want to introduce them to you, and so that you know who they are, where they come from, and what they've done. So the first is Dr. Chow Jiayi. Dr. Chow graduated from the School of PE with honours in 1999 and was awarded the gold medal from the Singapore Sports Council for being the top honours student in PE. He taught a few years in school before returning to the PE and Sports Science Department as a lecturer at NIE NTU. He further undertook a postgraduate study and obtained his PhD in the area of motor control and learning with the University of Otago, New Zealand. His research interests include examining multi-articular coordination from a dynamical systems theoretical perspective, visual perception in sports expertise in a pedagogical approach, where pedagogical principles underpinned by representative learning design, manipulation of task constraints, functional variability, and perception action coupling. Jiayi is currently Associate Dean, Program and Student Development with the Office of Teacher Education at NIE NTU. Next is Mr. Vern Gambetta. Vern is currently Director, Gambetta Sports Training System. He was also one of the founders and the first director of the USA Track and Field Coaching Education Program. He is recognized internationally as an expert in training and conditioning in sport and has lectured extensively and conducted clinics in Canada, Japan, Australia, and Europe. He has a wealth of knowledge and experiences, and I'm sure we're all eager to hear from him. Our next panelist is Mr. Stefan Widmer. He is currently the head coach and performance director at Singapore Swimming Association. He was previously the State Training Centre head coach at Queensland Academy of Sport, and in that time he has groomed the likes of Olympic champions Libby Trinket, Lizel Jones, and Jessica Schipper. His swimmers have set 20 world records and won an impressive 16 world championship titles. He is a 4-time winner of the Swimming Australia Coach of the Year award, and for his service to swimming as a coach, he was conferred a Medal of Order Australia. And our last panelist is Mr. Lim Teck Yin, CEO of Sport Singapore. Prior to joining SportSG, he spent 30 years of service in the Singapore Armed Forces, holding various significant command and staff appointments. He was a former national water polo player and won 6 consecutive Southeast Asian gold medals from 1985 to 1995, and an Asian Games bronze medal in 1986. The water polo team won the Singapore National Olympic Council Team of the Year award in 1986, 89, and 91. Since taking over the appointment as CEO of SportSG in 2011, he has forged a new strategic vision for Singapore sports, which took form in the form of Vision 2030 Master Plan, spearheaded delivery of major projects like the Singapore National Games, Singapore Sports Hub, the 2015 SEA Games, and the Asian Para Games. For his contributions to public service, Mr. Lim was awarded the Public Admin Medal Military in 2006 and Public Admin Medal Gold in 2015. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we have a panel with lots of experiences and knowledge, and we are very pleased to have them here. So if you can pose your questions to them, then we'll get the panelists to answer. But can I invite you to put your hands together and welcome our panelists. So the topic that we're discussing is coaching better every day, what it means for NSA and NSA leadership, coaches and teachers. And I'd like to take the last group first, which is the teachers. And I know Vern, yourself and Jiayi have got something in common. Vern, you were a PE teacher before, as well as a history teacher, and Jiayi, PE teacher and a geography teacher. So last night over dinner we talked about how in the past a lot of PE teachers are coaching the sports team, and we're seeing less of that in US, and here in Singapore it's the same. So what does it mean, if I can ask the question to two of you, for teachers to start thinking about coaching the sports teams more and how to coach better every day?
Can you hear me okay? For me, coaching is teaching. And 50 years ago when I started coaching in the States, virtually everybody was either a PE teacher or a teacher. And I think the pedagogical foundation is essential. A lot of the things that Rick talked about in his presentation were fundamentals of pedagogy. And the current generations of coaches, for various reasons, and I can speak more for what I see in the United States, but I've been here enough now that I feel like it's more about learning technique, learning sports science, learning all these other things. Those things are really easy to learn. You can learn those in a book. You can look at video now and get technique. But the ability to teach, and to me, getting better every day, that's my passion has become getting better at getting better. If you have an hour practice, are you making your athletes an hour better, or are you just making them an hour more tired? And to make them an hour better, you have to be fully engaged. They have to be fully engaged. And you have to be a teacher. So you have to carefully plan that lesson so that you have specific objectives and, you know, and see where you're going. So it's extremely important, and it's not old school. I think it's probably as current as anything that we could do today. So that's...
Thanks, Brett. Jiayi, have you got some comments?
Testing, yeah. I think it's important personally for teachers to be more involved in the sports for their students, because teachers obviously play a very important role, and a good coach, which many of you are as well, it's also underpinned by how you relate to your students and your kids. So I guess in these days probably not so many teachers are involved directly. I think they miss out on a wonderful opportunity to really get to know their students, rather than to perhaps not be so involved. So I guess this is where perhaps the teachers should perhaps really step forward a little bit more and say, look, maybe I may not be so comfortable with the sports, but take it upon themselves to know the sports a bit better and really get involved and to know the students better. Because in the schools, I mean, me being in teacher education, that's where the teachers need to touch the lives of the students. That's where they engage them at that young age, making a difference beyond just what sports can do, but knowing the students themselves and really working with them on molding them, helping them with values development. I think that's where it's critical. Yeah. And I believe perhaps because some of the teachers may feel quite uncomfortable because they're not familiar with the sports, as I mentioned earlier on. Take it upon yourselves, as I mentioned as well, to really learn, upgrade yourself, know the sports, work with the kids, work with the coaches as well to support the kids. I think that's important.
Thanks, Jiayi. And on that note, I think we know that there are NSAs like netball, for example, have come up with a program for the teachers, not just the PE teachers, but coaches in charge of netball, so that they are familiar and knowledgeable about coaching in netball. I think so. That's a positive step. So hopefully there are more NSAs that will step forward and do that, and that will benefit the coaching community, including the PE teachers. Yeah. All right. The next question that we've got here is directed to Rick, Vern, and so Stefan. A lot of coaches in Singapore are volunteers, and they may not necessarily be professional, therefore. So how do you work with these coaches, these volunteer coaches, in getting better every day, knowing that they are volunteers and they're not full-time coaches? Stefan?
To me, the most important thing is passion. So whether you're an amateur, whether you get paid for it, I believe I never worked a day in my life. I just get paid for it, what I love doing. And I'm passionate about. I was a trained PE teacher as well. I think it's if the community can support the ones who have a skill, whether they get paid for it or not, and they follow their passion and put the ones with the passion in front of the children to start influencing them in the right direction. To me, that's an essential part. Hopefully some of them who really love and embrace the coaching later on maybe get an opportunity. It's like the volunteering. A lot of great things come from volunteering. A lot of my sports science support were the psychologists. They at the beginning came from universities and they just started volunteering. And they had passion for it and they showed some talent and made their way through it that way. So find what you're passionate about, whether it's high performance, whether it's developing young children, and give them some early skills in the sport. But the passion to me is the most important part.
All right, passion being important. Thanks, Stefan. Rick, your views?
Yeah, well, I think that at the beginning, most sporting clubs, certainly it's the case in Australia, don't have enough qualified coaches, and so we rely on many, many volunteers to make a difference. My hockey club has 38 junior teams. We don't have 38 qualified coaches in our club, so we have parents and others. We encourage them to come and watch, because I coach one of the teams in the juniors, you know, so they're encouraged to come and watch us, and we interact with them, and so they are learning, and we are overseeing what they're learning. We hold courses for them, just only, you know, for an hour or two, just to give them some fundamentals, and we have people who are monitoring what they're doing, and so helping them along the way. The volunteer coaches are critical, they're most important, and but you need to give them some support and help to improve themselves. If they have what Stefan said, which is central, whether you're a volunteer or a professional coach, you've got to have energy and drive, then you can make a lot of progress, they can do a lot of good, and I've done a lot of things. I was an athlete, I practiced medicine, I was a parliamentarian, I've written some books. The thing that has given me the most satisfaction in my working life has been coaching. It was never a plan that I would go there, but in terms of helping other people realise their potential, it's one of the most satisfying things I think I've ever done. So there's lots of rewards.
Yeah, thanks for that. Rick?
Well, I think, first of all, the volunteer coach is the cornerstone of a national program, and they never get recognition. You know, they're the ones that start the youngsters out on the path. And yet, we were talking about this back in the room there, that a lot of times they're apologizing. Well, I just coach the 7-year-olds. Man, you're the most important coach in the whole thing. So we need to value them more in terms of giving them the proper recognition, some tools to be able to do. It's if you want to make money, don't go into coaching unless you're a football coach or you're in professional sport, maybe in the United States. I mean, we've made a living. All of us up here have made a living, but I'm still working. I'm going to be 72 in January. I'm not retiring, not necessarily by choice, right? And so if it's that, the biggest reward is going out there 3 times a week and seeing those little 7-year-olds like really eager to learn. And like Stefan said, you bring your passion, and then just it snowballs. It's contagious, you know. And my fondest memories as a coach are not coaching Olympians or the World Cup soccer team or something like that. It's my first 4 years coaching, where they were 7th to 9th graders, and I lived in the same neighborhood. I grew up with some of the kids' older brothers and things like that, and I didn't get paid, and it was wonderful. Some of those kids went on to be your water polo coach. I think you know who Terry Schroeder is. One of those kids was acknowledged the best water polo player ever, and but he wasn't a water polo player in 7th grade. He was a little chubby kid that could do everything. He was really well coordinated, you know. And so hopefully you can light a fire, but you have to have that fire too. And don't worry about technical knowledge in the sport, because sometimes that's what volunteer coaches worry about. Don't worry about technical knowledge. Again, you can acquire that. Go out there, be enthusiastic, be organized, because that gives the kids a good experience. I think that's really important. Make sure you give the kids a good experience, and a good experience isn't teaching them all the fine points at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's knowing that they come there, it's an hour practice, they get better. So.
If I can just add to what I've heard from these 3 experts, I think one of the most profound statements I've ever heard from a coach that he shared with me was that he said, "It is my privilege and my honor that these athletes are giving me 2 to 3 hours of their time in a training session. And my responsibility to them, after being accorded this privilege and honor, is to make sure that they get the most out of this training session. And it can be the most for the team, and we have to collectively understand what that is, but it's also for each individual, how they can reflect on the progress that they've made in the last 2 to 3 hours in this training session." And so whether we are professional coaches or volunteer coaches, I think we have to hold that mindset that we came with our passion, we came with our willingness to be a coach, but it is continuing on a day-to-day basis to be a privilege and an honor that these athletes would give us their time. We are also very fortunate today, in this day and age, when we've got the internet and there are loads of online resources that we can tap on as volunteer coaches to begin to enhance our knowledge, to begin to learn from what other people are sharing, to begin to connect with experts in different fields in order to pick up what they have to share with us. I think in Sports Singapore and CoachSG, we do have a responsibility to put structures in place, to have coaches registered, to have some level of accountability. But we recognize too that we need to support volunteers and support professional coaches on their ongoing journey, on their ongoing efforts at improving and learning. And I think this is something that the collective as a whole that's assembled in this room, coach educators, coach developers, coaches of athletes, can work very strongly together. But the key is always to put the athletes who have given us their time at the center of how well we prepare and how well we are able to add value to their lives.
Thank you, CEO. Right, the next question is about NSA and NSA leadership, the leadership of sports organization here. And the question is that coaching every day, in order for the NSAs and NSA leadership to make that happen, what do they need to do and what do they need to put in place? So I suppose the question is for Stefan, if you can share what swimming has done, and also CEO.
As we heard earlier on as well, I believe the coaches, all you guys are the most important part of the game, of the sport world. You're the ones daily influencing and changing people's lives. So therefore, as a sport association, I feel strong about looking after the coaches. But looking after the coaches in a way, in a tier level structure. So if you look after kids 8 to 12 years of age, what does best practice coaching look like for those little kids? Obviously it has to be fun, is technique, great understanding as important at that age? Maybe it is, maybe not. But then once we move through the developmental stages, how does coaching changes? And if you go all the way to world-class coaching, what does that look like? So we need to look after our coaches depending on what field they work in. And a lot of you guys have to swap the hats. So half an hour you stand in front of 6 or 8 year olds, and another half an hour later you work with 14-year-olds. Do you act the same way? Do you speak the same way? Do you express yourself the same way? Do you give them the same sets? Or do you change because it's the right thing for this group in front of you? So as a sporting body, we're very cautious about that, and we try to influence the coaching across swimming, that they specialize more into that. And as we heard earlier on as well, it's highly crucial that the coach of the 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, they're as crucial to us as a sport as the ones who work maybe later on with the high-performance athletes. We're in it together, and we need to work together, but each level of developmental is equally important. Probably grassroots is even more important, because if you do the job there well, we look after the sport all the way through. And coaching, if you look after grassroots coaches well, you look after the coaches all the way through as well.
Thank you, Stefan. CEO, would you like to share some of your thoughts about from Sport SG point of view?
Well, from where I sit, we obviously want to work with our sport organizations, our NSAs, to be able to systematically develop the system of coaching development, the system of, if you like, curriculum that is applied both to athletes as well as to coaches. This is a very basic requirement, and sometimes I am amazed that up to this day and age, we still haven't got that universally across some of our sports and some of our sport organizations. Sports Singapore is prepared to invest to bring in curriculum writers and developers who can work with our sport organizations. And we're also prepared to invest in a very important resource, which is the coach developer. Right? We spend a lot of time talking about learning how to coach our athletes, but we need to also learn how to coach our coaches. And that's something that we're prepared to invest in as well.
Thank you, CEO. We now like to open the floor for any questions from participants. There are mics along the aisle, so if you do have questions for the panel members, I invite you to just step forward and ask your question. Looks like we're a bit shy, so I'm just going to pick up a question from the Mentimeter, and this would be for CEO as well as Rick, from Singapore's perspective versus Australia. And the question is, would a state-owned high-performance structure better suit Singapore rather than leaving it to the various NSAs to manage it? Would coaches benefit or better benefit from that system and then decentralize at a later stage? Rick, you first, from the Australia's experience.
How would I know? Look, to fly from one side of Australia to the other takes 5 hours. You know, it takes an hour to drive across Singapore if the traffic's bad. You're centralised, whatever you want to do, but I think I don't think it was a mistake. Some people in Australia think it's a mistake that we went a route that said sport should own sport, and I think what the central body needs to do is, and I hope this isn't contrary to present policy, is to resource the sports so they can manage themselves. They know each sport is different and they know what they need to do. So you need to have an overarching, if you like, structure. But sports are capable of managing themselves given assistance and support. And I would have thought, whatever happens in Singapore, you're centralised. This is a fantastic opportunity. I mean, I worked in New Zealand, okay, same population, but 2 islands, north and south, and long distances, and the tyranny of distance was terrible for them. You have a huge advantage in Singapore that you are centralised, so that's a great plus. And what I do notice in Singapore is real vibrance and excitement, and indeed policies that are supporting sport. So I expect that we will see increasingly elite performances that are good, but we will see also a population which are engaged in sport much more. That's a real plus, and whatever else happens, you're centralised.
Thanks for that, Rick. CEO?
I think it's a difficult question to be answered just on the level of principles, because obviously the context of every country is different. So we think about it from the perspective of how we compete, right? It's no different when you think about athletes who compete on the field and how, when you think about it from a organization and authority perspective, you look at how you compete at the system level and how you compete at an ecosystem level that transcends your own system. And I think in Singapore, what we try to do is to anchor on what we think our competitive strengths are. And the smallness of our geography should be looked at as a competitive advantage that we should leverage on. Right? That's number one. Number two, the ability to be able to bring in the best talent that we can source from around the world in terms of expertise, and that expertise extends to coaching, technological expertise, everything that we can have access to, being a small and global city, I think we should attempt to do so. But after that, I think we recognize that there is no one size that fits all. Every sport located within some of these contexts would be different. Right? Some sports are very much geared in Singapore to being able to be driven and led by a sport organization. I think swimming is one example that's been quite exemplary. Right? There are times when I sit on my chair and I look at what's going on, and there's some question marks that pop up. And I remember I went to Stefan and asked him a few questions. And after I spoke to him for a few minutes, I decided I'm not sticking my finger in there. That's obviously his domain of expertise, and he should carry on. And the other sports that look a little bit different from our perspective, and we go down and ask a few questions, and then we decide we do have to stick our fingers in there. And whenever we do that, we also do that from the perspective of being accountable for the funding and the resources that we have to apply, and then later to account back to government how that money is invested and how it's spent. So I think the way I would look at it in Singapore is we try to capitalize on our advantages. That's geography, that's access to expertise, that's access to technology. And then we don't look at one size fits all. We recognize the different contexts of each different sport, and we apply ourselves differently. And we put in place certain ecosystem or systemic elements that would advantage everybody in the system. So NYSI, Sports School, SSI, these are entities and elements that we can introduce into our ecosystem that benefits everybody regardless of the particular way we organize the different sport. I think some of you are very aware, if not all of you are very aware also, that in the last 4 or 5 years we've put in place ActiveSG, and we've created these academies and clubs in ActiveSG, and those are intended to be complementary to whatever else people are doing in the ecosystem, and to be able to partner everybody else who's in that ecosystem and bring strengths to the table that enable all of us to level up.
I know the sign back there for time's up, but I just would like to comment, because I come from a country that people fall out of bed and win Olympic medals, right? I mean, and it's not fair. We used to have a healthy population. It's less and less so. But I always look you guys have a tremendous advantage. You have a healthy population, a very, very good educational system. So you have an educated population. So that's a terrific advantage, and obviously the geographical advantage. You have government support. In the States, people don't realize this. None of our sports are supported by the government. It's all individual. It's fundraising, a lot of things like that. But to me, and I think you're doing this, if you're looking at the elite level, look at the sports where you can be potentially successful at the Asian Games level and at the world level. It's futile to put effort into sports that just don't fit your geography, your tradition, and sport cannot be separate from the social-cultural milieu. We tend to think about that sometimes, you know, and it's, I don't know if cricket will ever catch on in the United States. I thought it would, 2020 might, but it just doesn't fit, it doesn't fit the nature of the country, you know, and that. And I think that always has to, you always have to come back to that, to give yourself the chance that you can have, and recognize that at the developmental levels you can have as many sports as possible, but you can't be excellent in everything at the elite level. You have to make some choices, and sometimes that's hard because it offends people, you know, and that's hard. I was involved in that in Canada, you know, where they made funding choices, and some people got mad, but the funding choices ended up Commonwealth medals, you know, and that. So that's, I think that's the bottom line.
Thanks, Vern. Thanks for that. I see that the time is up. I've still got a bunch of questions here, and I know you may have some as well. Although we come to the end of the panel discussion, these gentlemen will be outside during tea break, and you can engage them further in other questions. So can we put our hands together and thank our panel members?